Hey, I'm Matt with 731woodworks.com. Today, let me show you how my wife designed and we built this modern farmhouse TV stand together. Or what we did was we used faux shiplap on the sides, we got a biscuit white distressed on the bottom, and then we used Varathane sun bleach stain on the top. That gives it that nice modern look, but we still have that rustic farmhouse feel. Hey, if you're new here, please consider subscribing, hit that thumbs up. If you share this on your social media, I give you a virtual fist bump for that. Don't forget to check the description down below. I put useful show notes down there as well as links to the tools and supplies that I'm using in this video. So as you can see, this thing is 6 foot long, it's 20 inches deep, it's 32 inches tall. This is a 55-inch TV that we have sitting on it, so it gives you a reference for size. If needed, we could go up on TV size and still not run out of space on this thing. It's plenty big enough. It fills up this space nicely. I think it looks perfect. All right, so we're fixing to get started on this modern farmhouse TV stand. Pretty excited to build this. We were originally going to build a round coffee table, but that's going to be a future project. So we've decided we want a modern farmhouse TV stand for our living room. You can call this a shiplap TV stand, our farmhouse console table, a large TV stand, because we got a 55-inch TV that's going to go on it. So you can call it many, many things. Ultimately, it's a TV stand, and it's going to be open with one shelf in the middle. So it won't have any doors or drawers or anything like that on it. So first thing I got to do is break this plywood down. We're going to use one sheet of 3/4 inch sanded plywood and some 1x material. Should be all, and then of course a 2x top. Give it that thicker look on top. So that should be all the material we're going to use. First thing I'm going to do is break this down. I'm going to use this Craig rip cut to start breaking this down. If you don't have one of these, $40, be well worth your money. I'll drop a link in the description below if you're interested. Ultimately, what this does is it has a gauge on here. You measure off the distance that you want to cut. We're going to cut it just shy of 16 inches because I want to be able to use this whole sheet of plywood. Of course, 16 times 3 is 48. I will be able to rip down 16 inches, 16 inches, and 16 inches. That'll give me 2 shelves at 6 foot long, or a bottom shelf and a middle shelf at a little shy of 6 foot because of how I'm doing this. And then I'll have another piece here that I can use for one side, and then on the end down there I'll use that for the other side. Out of one sheet of plywood, that's going to give us enough material to make 2 sides and 2 shelves, and that'll give us our structure, and that's what we're after. So that's what I'm fixing to do now. I'm fixing to break this down. If you're doing this, be sure to support where you're cutting so that the piece doesn't fall, because once you get to that end down there, you don't want it to fall and break your plywood or to splinter it off, things like that. Also, on this rip cut, if you're using it, when you get close to the end, be sure that you hold this tight against the edge, because it has a tendency to want to walk on you if you don't hold that edge tight. But if you hold that edge tight, everything will be fine. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to rip this down, and then we'll start building our structure. Let's get started. Well, that was easy enough. We got our shelves cut out. Got my 2 shelves and one side that's not cut to length yet, and then this is the other side that is also not cut to length. We want our TV stand to be 32 inches tall. You make yours however tall you want it for your needs. We want ours 32 inches. So what I'm going to do is go 32 inches and then I'm going to subtract, well, look at there. Now that I think about it, that other piece that I've got for a side I don't need. So that's just going to be spare, because this thing is almost 6 foot long. I'm going to take 32 inches, and then my top is 1.5 inches because we're using a 2x material, 2x8s. So I can subtract 1.5 inches off the top. So we're going 32 minus 1.5 inches. We got 2 sides. It's going to be 30.5 inches long. So I'm going to cut those 2 pieces. We'll have our sides, then we can drill our pocket holes to put this frame together, and then we'll go from there. Pocket hole time. I'm gonna drill 4 pocket holes in each end of my bottom shelf and my top shelf, and that's gonna help us attach the frame or attach it to the sides. After we do that, we'll start working on facing it out as well as the back. And then the last thing I'll do is put a top on it, and those will be out of 2x. But first I'm gonna use this Kreg K5 drill my pocket holes. If you don't have one of these, they're about $130. I'll drop a link in the description below. A cheaper model is the R3. The Kreg R3 looks like this. You set your depth with these slide outs to whatever you need it, and you put it on your material and clamp it to it, and then you'll drill your pocket holes. This is what I started out with. I built a ton of stuff with this. It's about $30 or $40. It comes with this and the Kreg bit and maybe something else. I'm not sure. It doesn't come with the clamp, but if you have some clamps or quick clamps like I use from Walmart, like this, they're like $2 or $3 a piece from Walmart. They're very expensive, but they work well to clamp this into place. So if you want to do that, you can do this, or you can use the Kreg K5 or the K4. I prefer the K5 because it has the clamp on the front. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna drill 4 pocket holes in each end, and then we'll start putting this thing together. So we're going to start building a frame here. What we've decided to do, we only want this top or bottom shelf only 3.5 inches off the floor. You can adjust this however you would like. So I'm going to take, this is a 1x4. I'm going to rip down some 1x6 material to fit this. But what we want is 3.5 inches from the bottom of our cabinet up to the top of the bottom shelf. So what I'm going to do is just measure on each end 3.5 inches. So that's what a 1x4 measures, 3.5 inches from the floor. I'm gonna make a mark here and square this up. I'm gonna do that on both ends, and then we'll set how far we want our middle shelf from the top and from the bottom, about center ways. Using 1.25 inch coarse thread pocket hole screws for this plywood. Anytime you're using that 3/4 inch thick material, you'll use these 1.25 inch pocket hole screws. The link to this stuff will be in the description below if you're interested.
Walking home late at night, maybe 2:30. A little drunk, but I'm alright, 'cause I've been hanging with you, and it feels like love. Tell me if I'm wrong, 'cause it feels like love. Yeah, it feels like love.
Alright, so it's time to put the middle shelf in. Before I've done that, I got the boss out here and found out what she wanted, since this is her project that she wanted built. What we decided was we're going to use 2-inch, I'm going to rip down some 2-inch trim. We're going to put that on the front face along here, as well as on the front edge of the shelf, on this shelf, and then there will be a 2-inch strip across here that I'm going to tie into the top. Long story short, 13 7/8 inches from the top of this shelf to the top of this shelf. So what I did was cut 13 1/8 inch spacers. So I cut those 2 spacers. I can just lay in there like that, and then I can attach this, and this will keep the spacing equal without me having to do a whole lot of running around. I'm going to use the clamp to hold this down. Just going to show you those are laying loose. I'll do the same thing on that end. Put those 4 pocket hole screws in there, and then we'll be ready to start facing this out. All right, I got the middle shelf in. One thing I failed to point out when you put this thing together, I always make sure I have a front and a back. And what I mean by that is I always make sure that this is always exactly flush here where I'm joining everything up. If there's a tiny bit of difference in the width of your cut, for whatever reason it happens, maybe your saw walked a little bit, maybe it just got off, you want to put that on the back so that it's not seen when you put your facing on there. So just keep that in mind. Now what we decided to do, we've seen a lot of people put those X's on the end, and that's pretty common. That's pretty, it's extremely common in the farmhouse style. So this is a farmhouse modern TV stand, what we're calling it. What we want to do is put a shiplap look on the end. And by doing that, you can do that many ways. You could actually use shiplap if you want. You can cut some 1x and put on there. But to keep the weight down and just keep the thickness down, we've done this on the end of our cabinets. I'll try to remember to show a little bit of video right here about that. So what we want to do is I take 1/4 inch plywood. This is called Luan, Luan. This is just 1/4 inch plywood. It's really smooth. It's just 1/4 inch thick, actually a little less than 1/4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rip that down in 3.5 inch strips, and we're going to lay this on there, 3.5 inches all the way down. We'll start at the bottom and come up, and that way we've got a shiplap look on the ends, and I think that'll look good once it's all painted. And what I do is I'll take a nickel and put in between each one, and that'll give it a little bit of a gap. So it'll kind of, and then once you paint that, it's going to look like shiplap or board and bat or whatever you call it stuff. So it'll kind of look like that. You'll be able to see the lines like in this garage where you see the pieces together. So before we jump into the time lapse, I'm going to show you how I do this. This is not a scientific method, so if you've got a better way, feel free to do it that way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the bottom. I'm going to take wood glue. This is Type Bond 2. I put it on there pretty liberal. I mean, not going crazy, but just enough for it to stick. See, it doesn't matter. And I'm just going to line it up on the bottom. The way I'm doing that here is my workbench, and I'm just going to, and again with the front, I want to make sure that it's all lined up with the very front, because I want to cover all this up with the trim. So I want to make sure that's flush. Once that's flush, this is 5/8 inch brad nails. If you don't have a brad nailer, you can take some finished nails or some staples and put this in with. You can buy those locally. I'm just going to put one in each, one on top, one on bottom, one on each side. Again, the trim will cover these up. And I'm going to put one right in the middle. And I'll come back later and putty that. So we got the one in place. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put the glue on the back of this piece. And I'm going to take these nickels. This is actually my wife, so I deal with the nickels. I'm going to put these nickels, I'm going to put one on each side. And all that is a spacer of about 1/8 of an inch. So if you can use anything to space with. Make sure that front's lined up and flush. There we go, and I'm gonna just continue on till I get to the top, and I may need to trim that top piece up. This is gonna give us, once this is painted, it'll give a shiplap look. And then you've got a solid side. The reason I did this instead of taking 2x or 1x's and going up like this, I needed something solid on the back. I could take 1x6s or whatever and put those together with pocket hole screws, but I didn't feel like I would have enough structure on the inside with that middle shelf, and I wanted that to be a solid joint or a solid piece. And then by doing this, it gives us that look that we were after, and it is structurally sound, in my opinion. So that's why we're doing that. I'll time lapse the rest of these, and we're going to do the same thing on the other end. So now we have the faux shiplap, and I know some people are going to comment below and tell me it's not shiplap. I know it's not shiplap. It's not supposed to be shiplap. It just kind of, it's supposed to look like shiplap, and so that's what we got. And I think it's going to look really nice when we paint this. If you were staining it, I wouldn't recommend staining, because you're going to have two different colors. One, because this is sanded birch, and then I don't even know what they make this Luan out of. But this will obviously come out darker. I mean, it's already darker, and it's just a different grain pattern. Unless you like that contrast, you can just, I guess you can stain if you wanted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this out with the 1x stuff. And what I'm going to do is cut my first 1x on each end, and then that way I can measure the length and know exactly how long I need this piece to be. These will be 2 inches for these, and then the bottom one will be 3.5 to give it a little bit of depth on the bottom. You want the bottom to look a little thicker than the top pieces. That's kind of the going trend. All right, so instead of just putting a square board down there, what I've done is what I like to do on a lot of my projects. I'm making my own trim here. This is just a 1x4, and what I've done is I've taken my 3/8 inch roundover bit. I looked at a 1/4 inch roundover, and it was a little more shallow than I liked as far as the round it was giving me. So I went with a 3/8 after consulting with the boss. She decided 3/8 was better as well. And all I do is I'll make it stick, that 3/8 inch roundover, just stick it past it. If you get it to stick up like that, then what it does, instead of rounding over, it rounds over, but it also puts a nice little profile on there. And so that's what I'm going to do on my bottom pieces, and not on the other pieces, just on the bottom. So you saw me just take those pieces off the ends, and the reason is I didn't think about it, but my wife thankfully caught it when she come out. If we do this, put these pieces on with that routed edge like that, and then we got our trim piece, when it comes down, it's not going to look right because it's going to be square, and we want that flush look when they meet. Mistakes happen in almost every woodworking project, well, most of mine anyway. And so with that, we're going to just adapt and overcome. We're just going to go with square pieces that are 3.5 inches wide. Right before I put this face piece on, or started to measure for it, I decided that I was going to need some more supports under there because this is a long span, it's almost 6 foot. Now, I didn't want this shelf to be saggy, so I went ahead and put some supports under there. That just gives it some more stability. I did that by pocket holding it, screwing it into the next piece of plywood with some wood glue as well. I went ahead and drilled pocket holes here so that I could screw into the face plate that's going here. And I'm gonna go ahead and use my Craig R3 here to put some pocket holes there and there. And this measures 2 3/4 of an inch thick, which is the distance from the bottom of this shelf to the bottom of the cabinet itself. So now we've got 4 feet for it to sit on. And it just gives it a little more stability, and it keeps that bottom shelf from sagging over time. The middle shelf, we'll figure that out when we get there. So I'm figuring this out as I go. That's why it's kind of, it may seem that way. I was trying to figure out how to put this top trim piece on to match this one. And so I've decided I cut this 1 3/4 inches. My trim piece will be 2 inches. It'll go right on top of that. And how I'm going to attach those, I'm going to put one in the front, one in the back. I'm just going to use pocket holes. Put those in there. I'm going to put these 2 on, and then I'm going to put 2 braces between them. This isn't really to hold any weight. It's just to kind of help frame everything up. Keep these ends square, and that's what I'm going to do with this. So they're just setting in there, as you can see. So I just cut these 65 inches, which is the length of this shelf and the length of that shelf, so it keeps everything nice and straight. And then I'm going to put that back piece on the same way. I'll cut 2 braces just to keep from kind of being wobbly. And then once those are on, I can go ahead and put these trim pieces on. I did put this piece on at 2 inches wide. And then when I got to thinking about it, this one's going to inset like that. And then I'm going to have another piece right here. And so it's going to make it look like it's 2 3/4 inches wide because I have this 3/4 inch piece. So I got to rip this one down to 1.25 inches. And then this extra 3/4 will make it 2 inches. And then these 2 pieces on the side will match. So that's what we're going to do there. So that was another that I discovered after it was on, but at least the glue hadn't dried. So got the face trim on it. We don't have the top built yet. That's coming up next. We got the ends done. I think it looks really good. Especially when we get that painted, it's going to look sharp. And we put those braces in there so that this would be straight, or as straight as we could get it. So it's, I mean, that's pretty close. If you got something that looks similar to that, you're good to go. And of course, the front side's going to look like that. You can see the gap here is minimal to none once we sand, and this one's a little proud. I'm going to sand that back. And then once we sand this and paint, everything's going to look sharp. This is not weight bearing as far as this piece itself. Like if you stood on that, it's going to break. But once we put that 1.5 inch 2x top on there, we aren't going to have any issues with weight. So I wouldn't worry about that. Remember, this piece is 1.25 inches because we got this 3/4 inch piece. It makes this 2 inches wide to match that side. If you don't, you'll wind up with a fat piece there. And I made a mistake, so I have to sand that glue off a little bit. Of course. So now what I got to do is sand that, but I'm going to go ahead and put that back on, and then I will sand it, and then I'll build that 2x top. So I went ahead and cut out this luan. This is 1/4 inch plywood, like I was saying. It's got a good side and a kind of a rough side. I'm going to put that rough side at the back because you'll never see it. And then the inside will be a little bit smoother, a lot easier to work with when you're sanding, painting, things like that. I just cut it to fit, just a bit shy of the back, maybe an 1/8 inch shorter than it should have been on purpose because I didn't want it to drag the floor. So that's what I did, and you'll never see that anyway. So, and I made it fit on the plywood inside this piece. If I had thought ahead of time, I could have brought this back another 1/4 inch and hid the edge of that, but I don't think it'll matter once it's painted anyway. So that's what we got. I'm gonna flush all this up and just tack it in place with my brad nailer, and put a little glue around there to hold things straight. That'll significantly sturdy up your cabinet when you put a back on it like that. Even though this is thin material, that'll actually help make everything a lot more rigid. So. So I used biscuit or satin. I used satin espresso for that brown for the undertone. Then we're going to put 2 coats of biscuit white, Sherwin-Williams biscuit white, and then we'll take our sander and sand that off. While that's drying, we're going to build our tabletop, and I'm using 2x8s. I've got 3 of them. I want a 20-inch wide top, so this is perfect for that because they're 7 1/4 wide. And once we rip them down, joint them on the table saw, and then cut them down. And pocket hole screw, everything, we'll get them at 20 inches. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna cut these down to 6 feet because that's what I want my top. So I'm gonna cut them all 3 at 6 foot. And then I'm gonna rip them with my table saw with my joint. I'm gonna joint with my table saw. If you've not seen that video, I'll put a card above. That's how I do that. And then we'll pocket hole screw these things. I would like to get this sanded and stained tonight. It's 5 o'clock. I want this sanded and stained so that the stain can set up overnight so we can clear coat it tomorrow because I want that in my house tomorrow. So if you can't tell, it's getting dark outside. So I've got the pocket holes done. What I want to do now is sand this down and get it nice and smooth. It's a good solid table. The joints look really good. So if you see this is actually where they're just not quite even. Once I get that sanded, that seam will go away. And I'll trim off each end to make them perfectly flush. This end's pretty good, but this other end, it seems to always wind up like this. But just take my circular saw and I'll be able to rip that down. And then we'll be ready to put some pre-stained conditioner on there, Minwax, and then we'll stain it. So we didn't get done with it last night, but we've continued today. Sanded that thing down to 120 grit. I usually don't go any lower than 120. I just find that this pine doesn't really require it. So that's where I stop at, 120. And I did use my router to go ahead and, with a 1/4 inch round over bit, put a little detail in the top. That gives it a little bit more depth. If you can't do that and you don't have a router, you can just hit that with your sander and just kind of round that edge over. So I've sanded the top, briefly sanded the bottom because it's the bottom. And I'm just going to stain everything sun bleached. We're going to try that. We've never tried that color before, but my wife wanted that color in our house for our TV stand, so we're going to try that. And then, but I'm going to set this to the side. I've got to figure out a way to get this cleaned back up because I got router bits in it. We're going to clean this up and paint it a biscuit white, 2 coats. And once that's dry, we'll distress it, and then we'll also stain this top. So we're fixing to put the stain on. I've let that pre-stain conditioner dry for about 40 minutes. I usually 30, 45 minutes is what I let it dry usually. We're going to do this on the back side first. We, in our infinite wisdom, have picked out sun bleach stain, which is her idea. So I think it's going to turn out nice. She liked this color, so we're going to try it. It's the first time I've ever used varathane stain, so I'm going to see how that works out as well. I always stain the bottom side of my project first and then flip it over and do the top side. The bottom side will be, doesn't have any pre-stain conditioner on it, and I didn't sand it as smooth as I do the top. It's just a lot of wasted effort if you do that. So I'm going to stain the bottom side first and I'm going to flip it over. If you don't have any of these, I highly recommend them. These are bench cookies. You can use them to sand with. It keeps stuff from moving around, and if you buy the paint cones to go with them, it keeps your project up off the our workbench. So when you flip this over, I can set this on there. It's not going to be just sitting on the workbench, and the stain will be able to dry underneath there. So let's do that. We're going to put that stain on. To finish the top, I'm not going to use any clear coat or anything like that because my wife don't want a clear coat on it. She wants a wax finish. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to take this Johnson's paste Johnson's Paste Wax 40 steel wool, which is a very fine steel wool. You dip it down in there, get it good and coated on there, and with the grain we're going to wipe, or I'll wipe with the grain. And what the steel wool does is that'll take off any imperfections in the wood. So if it feels kind of bumpy or stuff like that, it'll take that off and it won't harm your wood. Once I do that with one pass, kind of back and forth across there, and I get it smooth to the touch, I'll take a regular washcloth I buy at Walmart for like a pack of 20 for $3 or something like this. You can use whatever kind of cloth you want. I'll take and wipe the excess off, and if I feel like that it needs more, then you just dip your rag into the paste wax, put some more on there, and then wipe it off or buff it off, however you want to do it. It doesn't take a whole lot, and then that stuff will dry to a hard finish, so it'll kind of protect your surface. And once it's done, it gives it not a flat, but not a satin either, so it's kind of a in between there. And this is sun bleached, Varathane sun bleached. It come out really nice, and it's really smooth feeling. I like it. All right, so once we're done with the paste wax, we're gonna let this dry. It'll dry to a hard finish, and it gives it a nice smooth feel. This is that Varathane sun bleached. I really like how this come out. It's gonna look really nice on that cabinet. We're fixing to distress that as soon as the wife gets home from work. She's gonna distress it because she knows how much distressing she wants on there. We'll let her do that, and then we'll attach the tabletop after it's distressed. So we're getting close. We're getting close. Let's do it. So to attach the tabletop, we're using the Rockler tabletop fasteners. And what I like to do is I take my router. I've got an edge guide on my router. I got an edge guide on my router. I use an 1/8 inch straight bit. I set the depth to match that tabletop fastener, and you just set it on something flat like this and figure out how deep you want it. And the way these work is if you've got, anyway, I take my router, I set the depth this way as well as in. So the edge guide will let me set it this way, and then the depth of the bit goes in and out. And what I do is, these are basically, some people call them Z-clips or tabletop fasteners. And the idea is you put these in, they have a hole on one side only. Put these in, and you'll put the screw in from the underside up into the tabletop. And this allows for wood movement, expansion and contraction in any direction there. And that keeps your tabletop from splitting. And these are very inexpensive. I'll drop a link in the description below, but that's how we're going to attach those with the tabletop fasteners. So there it is, we finished this thing. This thing is nice, nice, nice. Check it out. So that wax finished up nicely. It's dried, it's hard now. It dries to a hard finish. It doesn't leave a waxy residue. It kind of like, you would think that it would because of the name, it's a wax. You would think it's kind of a waxy feel. It's not. It dries hard, it's dry. You don't have to worry about that coming off. What I didn't show is when we did wax the bottom in a similar way. So we wiped it on and dried it off. So it has that wax finish as well. Also, if you remember, when I was building it, I put a brace on the back, a vertical piece right there in the middle. We took that out. This is how I decided to brace the bottom. So if you notice, I got a piece of 1 inch 1x across the bottom there, right there. And all I did was glued that in, and take some brad nails and brad nail it in from the back as well as brad nail it in from the top. So that gives us a nice structure. It's solid. It's not going anywhere. If you have any questions about this build, how I built it, some of the tools, supplies, and techniques I used, please drop a comment below. I'll be happy to try to help you.